Creative genius indeed. I'm going to bring a drink up because I think storytellers should always have a drink with them on stage. Yeah, I once saw years ago, I went to, I think it was Faversham Library or somewhere quite sophisticated like that to see the late great Duncan Williamson perform. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Duncan. We spent a weekend after this performance. He actually, some weeks later, we had some time together, and it was Duncan who taught me lots of the stories of the Seal people, the Selkies. But this particular night, Duncan came on. He was a Scotsman. He was a Scottish traveller, and he got on. There wasn't a stage; it was a library. He got up in front of the audience, sort of like this, and he had a white ceramic mug, which we all assumed was like a mug of tea or something. And he put it down beside him on the table, and about 15 minutes into this performance we were all completely riveted. His wife, who was sitting in the front row, reached into the tartan bag by her side and lifted out a bottle of single malt whiskey. She leaned forward and she just emptied some of the whiskey into the mug, put the bottle back. Another 15 minutes passed and she got the bottle again, and another slug of whiskey went into the mug, and Duncan was drinking all the way through. Absolutely brilliant. And this went on right the way through the performance. So I think this thing, storytelling is fueled by alcohol. Basically, it has to be. So that's a prop. That's an important prop. And I'm not going to tell you stories of the Seal people tonight. I wasn't actually sure what to do. I had a strange few weeks, and I didn't really have time to prepare anything. But as I was coming into the door, I saw the poster for tonight, which is, I guess people are probably familiar with it. It's the Fool from the Tarot, the guy with the little dog running along behind him. And it kind of reminded me of a story. So I thought I'd tell the story tonight that it made me think of. It seemed kind of appropriate. And it's a true story, it's a family story. It was told to me by my grandfather originally. And I know it's true because my grandfather never ever told a lie in his entire life.
Really?
I can see you can't believe that. It's not a lie. He told true stories. He told me stories all the way through my childhood, all true. Anyway, the story goes that back in the 1930s, in the late 1930s, my grandfather was living in Gravesend. He was a dock worker, and he had a little terrace house, 2 up, 2 down type house, right near the docks themselves. So it's like a 5-minute walk to work. And he lived there with my grandmother, obviously, and five sons, one of whom obviously was my father, and 2 girls. Quite a big family, not massive at the time, but big. My grandfather wasn't stupid though. He's only a dock worker, but he was pretty intelligent, and he read the newspapers and he listened to the wireless every day. And this being something like 1938, he knew what was coming. He'd heard the news from Spain about the Civil War, he knew what was going on. He'd heard about the bombing of Guernica, that terrible, terrible event that Picasso painted. You all know the painting, I'm sure. And he knew that living by the docks, and the docks were going to be a target, and he knew straight away that obviously if the docks were going to get bombed, then his house was right in, well, not exactly the firing line, but it was on the bombing run for sure. And there he was with his kids and all the rest of it. So my grandfather, being the way he was, and the kind of man he was, he decided to not take any chances and evacuate Gravesend on the spot, before the war even had a chance to get started. So they assembled the few possessions they had, because they were working class family, they didn't have a lot, it was 1930s, into a handcart, a wheelbarrow, basically. And they left. I don't know whether they paid the rent or not, probably not, before they left. And off they went with the handcart. And the whole lot of them, the whole family, they walked right the way through, right away from Gravesend, up into East London, through East London, across the Thames, into Essex, right the way across Essex with a brief stop to try being a chicken farmer, I believe. That didn't work out, so they carried on. They went across, which way around is it? They went across Suffolk. And they got to the border with Norfolk, and they reached a little place. I think you'd almost call it a town nowadays, but at the time it was a village. A place called Bungay. You all know it? Yeah, some people know it. And that's where they stopped. And it's right on the border. It's so close that if you cross the bridge over the River Waveney, you're into Norfolk. And it was a really rural place. My granddad was He was a town boy, he'd been born and brought up in Gravesend, you know, he'd never been in the countryside before, but that's where they, for some reason, they found a rented cottage and they decided to stop, presumably because they figured Bungay wouldn't get bombed. Anyway, it was the 1930s, times were rough, the war hadn't quite started yet, there was no work to be had, and my grandfather would do odd jobs here and there around the village, being a carpenter by trade, as well as a docker, as people had several trades quite often in those days. He found bits and bobs. But a lot of the time, when he couldn't find regular work, he did something that a lot of country folk at the time used to do, and I'm sure they don't do it now, but they used to have a way of making ends meet in the countryside. It's called poaching. And we don't do a lot of poaching nowadays. But at the time, poaching, going out, you could say borrowing an animal that might belong to somebody else is one definition of poaching. People had specialities. If you lived in the Highlands of Scotland, obviously you poached deer. If you lived, I don't know, in Wales, you poached sheep, whatever. If you lived near a big estate, you might poach partridge and pheasant. In Bungay, there was one resource that you could poach. Just the one. And I went to Bungay a few years ago actually and had another look, and sure enough it's still the same. The thing they have in Bungay in abundance is rabbits. And everyone in Bungay went hunting rabbits and poaching rabbits. You weren't supposed to do this, but that's what they did. And to help him with the poaching, with the catching the rabbits, my granddad had a couple of dogs. But there was one dog in particular that my granddad, in private, used to boast was the finest rabbiting dog in all of Norfolk and Suffolk. That might have been true. However, and there's always a however, isn't there? However, one night, my granddad, totally uncharacteristically, obviously, went to the pub, had a few pints. They might have been quite strong pints. And he was talking to the other chaps in the village, the other fellas. And of course, what should happen, but one thing led to another, and before very long, grandfather was boasting that his dog was not only the finest rabbiting dog in the whole of Norfolk and Suffolk, oh no. It was the finest rabbiting dog in all of England. The whole length and breadth of England. This did not go down terribly well. There were a lot of other fellas in there. They all went out hunting rabbits. They all had dogs they were proud of and they loved to bits and thought were good rabbiting dogs. So for my grandfather, this townie, this outsider, to come in and start boasting about his dog, they were not impressed. And one thing led to another again, and as it happened, one of them made a bet with my grandfather. He said, Wilfred, that being my grandfather's name, Wilfred, if you can prove tomorrow, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that your dog is the finest rabbiting dog in the whole of England, there's £10 in it for you. Now, £10 was a lot of money in those days. My grandfather didn't think twice. He took the bet. He shook hands on it. What my grandmother said when he got home, I can't imagine, but that's what he did. He took the bet. There was no way out. The next morning, bright and early, there's a place called, if you don't know Bungay, there's a place called Bungay Common, which is the common ground, big, like a big meadow, basically, huge area. It certainly was at the time. It might be a bit smaller now. But the next morning, there they were on the edge of Bungay Common. There was my granddad, there was my grandfather. There was the man he'd made the bet with. There was everybody else who'd been in the pub because they wanted to see what was going to happen, obviously. There was the dog, because there wouldn't be much point without the dog. So there they were on the common. They waited a little while. The sun rose up. Down on the common, out of its burrow, the head of a rabbit appeared. There's a rabbit. You get special effects for this, you see. Then, all of a sudden, out of another hole, another burrow, another rabbit appeared. And the two rabbits began to hop around the field. And my grandfather slipped the leash from the collar of the dog and pointed at the two rabbits. And the dog shot away like an arrow from a bow, flying across the field, flying across the common towards the rabbits. And the rabbits, contrary to popular opinion, are not stupid. They saw the dog coming at them. They saw its teeth glinting in the sunlight. They saw the blur of speed as it came bearing down on them. And the two rabbits, they ran. And being smart, as they ran and the dog came after them, the two rabbits, they split up. They went separate ways. One rabbit went that way, the other rabbit went that way. No way could the dog chase two of them at once. As they did that, now in the middle of the field, this is common, it was common land, anyone could use it. The previous day, someone had been out cutting grass for hay and had left in the common, middle of the common, a scythe. For those who don't know what a scythe is, long curved wicked blade, razor sharp, or on the end of a long handle like the reaper carries, that's it. Standing there, the blade vertical. And as people watched, the two rabbits flew off in opposite directions. The dog swerved, headed straight towards where the scythe was standing. And at full speed, without drawing breath, that dog went right into the blade, head first. So hard and so fast that that dog was cut into two pieces from the tip of its nose through to the tip of its tail. And then one half of the dog chased one rabbit, and the other half of the dog chased the other rabbit. And for a good 5 minutes, the two halves of the dog circled around the common, chasing those two rabbits, until it finally caught them both in the two halves of its jaws. And then the two halves of the dog came back together again. And the dog trotted back to my grandfather with two rabbits in its mouth at the same time. And that's how my grandfather proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that his rabbiting dog was indeed the finest rabbiting dog in the whole length and breadth of England, and how he won his £10 bet. No ceramic or whiskey. I have no idea how long that took.
I wasn't watching, I was listening.
That's what you'll say.
Okay, just wave when you want me to get off. A little while ago, this book came out. It's called Unauthorised Person. This is the sales pitch, by the way. Unauthorised Person. It's obviously by me, and it's poems about Medway, effectively, set in and about Medway. A mere £8 if anyone wants to buy a copy. I do have copies for that. I'm obliged to say that by my publisher these days, otherwise I get into trouble. Just want to read a few bits from here. I'll read this one actually. This was one of the memories from my childhood. My dad used to go on really long walks. I mean really long walks sometimes, but when I was about 7 or 8, we tended to walk across, or even younger than that, we tended to walk across the Great Lines. There was a toy shop in Chatham that we used to go to. Actually, it was a gentleman's outfitters, but they also sold toys. And on the way back, we'd always stop and we'd have a picnic at that most appropriate place to have a picnic, the War Memorial. So it's kind of deep in my memory, this place, and it's featured in a couple of poems. This one is called The Angels, and I was quite pleased. One reviewer said that I think the Wargraves Commission or whoever would not be very happy about this, but the reviewer said it should be chiselled into the side of the War Memorial for eternity. It's called The Angels. It is deep, deep, this broad tongue of the ocean rolling over us. And the fine grain of salt water seeps through the lattice of our bones. We have grown brothers to the coral. We who from our human grace fell as dark and speechless angels among these glittering shoals. Above our skulls, the towering fathoms. This is peace after its fashion that we have swallowed through its mouth of storm.
Yeah.
Right, you don't have to applaud after. Actually, the thing is not to applaud at the end of every poem. Applaud at the end. There's kind of etiquette to these things. Over the years, I've been gathering little bits I've heard here and there, overheard in Medway, What comes out of people's mouths often says more about the people in the area than they realise. And there's this kind of sequence that's been accumulating, and part of it ended up in here. The first, oh God, I probably won't read them all, the first 21 little pieces. Each one is, I think of each one as like a little tiny poem, mini poem in itself that kind of encapsulates lots. So I'm going to read some of those. It's called Street Gleaning. See what I did there? Pun. And these are all genuine, by the way. I've not had to make anything up, just in case. Like the story, it's true. You know? According to the wise florist on Luton Road, all flowers inside. A sign on the door of the local massage parlour. Please use rear entrance. Two elderly women on the 166 bus. One says to the other, "We didn't have reflections yesterday." "Mind you," she continues, "I didn't miss them." A bicycle saddle lies like a horse's skull by the side of the A2. Spell to summon a small child. Get here right now. I'll give you the back of my hand if you don't." "Take it from me," he said, "there's no rest for a working man." And they did. They took it all from him, leaving him only the ground that he's buried in. Unsaying number one. She's washing her feet of it. A one-legged grey pigeon folds itself to sleep amongst the anti-pigeon spikes on a high street window ledge. The prostitutes who stand along New Road are painted statues, erected to celebrate Medway's achievements. Unsaying number two. It's illegible of me. In the Turkish grocery on the corner of Chatham High Street and Union Street, dates stuffed with almonds, pistachio Turkish delight with extra pistachios, pine nuts, virgin olive oil and gleaming purple aubergines. Unsaying number three. He became apocalyptic. Scrawled on a lamppost with a black felt-tip pen. Kill all niggas. KKK. Unsaying number four. Skagheads don't need bread. Overheard on Chatham High Street. He thinks it's funny calling me a prick and a div, just because I'm inadequate. 16. Homes evacuated in bomb scare. Luton arms siege drama. 5 bus shelters vandalised in Gillingham. The scrap metal merchant's lorry joins his funeral cortege, his flatbed bearing heaps of flowers. Mother to small child. There ain't no gathers along here today, is there? Small child to mother. Good, I hate gathers. Overheard on the train. I'm inside 6 months, out 3 weeks, and I'm up the duff. So I sprayed his bollocks with lighter fuel, and he finished in hospital with 3rd-degree burns. Like Hector's lost shield, a single silver hubcap peers from the wasteland with its one eye. In the eye of the Chatham sigil, they are building their future upon the rubble of our past. I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Available at the end, okay. Also available, the story of Medway's forgotten, not quite forgotten, lost poet and artist.